If a boy grows up without a father, he is more likely to go to prison than graduate from college. That is the impact of a fatherless home on a boy.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Natasha Feroze and today I'm joined by Katy Faust at the ARC conference, and she has written the book, amongst several, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. Katy, just to begin with, that to me, children's rights movement seems so obvious, and any parent surely would want the children's rights to go first. So why, just for our viewers that have no idea about you, but why do we need a children's rights movement? Well,
first of all, we need to properly define what we mean by children's rights. Unfortunately, that label has been co-opted and adulterated by leftist progressives to try to smuggle in all kinds of child-destroying ideologies.
Yeah.
So they will say that children have a right to sexual pleasure, or children have a right to have a transgender identity hidden from their parents at school, or something like that. Children do not have fundamental rights to either of those things. They do have a fundamental right to life. They have a fundamental right to be known and loved by their mother and father. That is recognized in the most widely ratified treaty in the world, the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, of which the UK is a party. So these are not obscure, I'm not making this up. These are widely acknowledged throughout the world. So when we're looking at children's right within the family, their right to be known and loved by the two people responsible for their existence, if that genuinely is a right, number one, it really should inform and shape all of our conversations about marriage, family, divorce, modern families, same-sex parenting, reproductive technologies, and adoption. And number two, when we properly understand children's natural rights, we know that they perfectly reinforce natural parental rights as well. So properly defining rights is going to give us the answers that we need to move forward and address a lot of these major cultural issues that we're battling today.
So have you found, when you've made this movement and tried to talk about it and advocate for children's rights, a lot of people are saying, oh, so are you talking about children having the rights to have puberty blockers?
Yes.
Because,
Yes. We do have to do a little bit of corrective work to begin with, right off the bat. But we made it a very strategic decision to not say children's interests or children's needs. These are fundamental natural rights that children have. And unfortunately, our civil law may not recognize them, but that doesn't mean that they go away. We discern and we understand what natural rights are by looking at the natural world. These are universal moral truths that are going to be a reality, whether you live in, the United Kingdom, whether you live in Nebraska, whether you live in South Africa. These, because they are grounded in fundamental human realities, these are natural laws that can be applied to all children at all times, throughout the world.
One of the ways that you say that children's rights become eroded, and you talk about this a lot, is through divorce and the increase in no-fault divorce. What are, obviously, no-fault divorce is one type of category, but what are the main reasons in America and elsewhere that people get divorced these days?
I think that there's a conception, probably perpetuated by media and a handful of stories, that divorce is necessary because of abuse. And it is true, that most civil law and even religious communities have allowed for separation at minimum and often divorce in the name of abuse or extreme cruelty. And there is a time to separate, at least, if not divorce. And in those cases, I think it's very important to punish the abuser. That's really what needs to take place, is there needs to be a reward and a surrounding of support of the innocent spouse, and there needs to be punishment, both socially and criminally, for those that are perpetuating the abuse. But that's not the majority of why divorces take place, especially in the United States today. About 70%, maybe 2/3, depending on the survey you're looking at, of divorces break up low conflict marriages. Marriages where nobody is at fault. It wasn't adultery, it wasn't abuse, it wasn't addiction, it wasn't abandonment. It was, we fell out of love, or we're having communication difficulties, or maybe there's a porn use issue. All things that are really significant issues, but not necessarily because mother or father or child is in danger. So what we did is we took divorce out of the realm of saying you are at fault of breaking your marital vows, your covenant, your contract, if you want to put it that way. And in essence, we moved it to the place where anyone can leave a relationship for any time and there's no breach of contract. unfortunately, what that means is standards for marriage are lowered, lower barriers getting in, easier barriers getting out, fewer marriages taking place. And of course, it is the children who experience the lifelong harms when their two parents, to whom they have a natural right, who are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them, are living in two different homes.
Could you tell some more stories about that? Because every time, and your book has a lot of anecdotes in, which is really good to contextualize everything. But anyone that I know that's got divorced, all they ever say is the children are going to come first. Mm-hmm. So what they might be saying and their actions could be different, mm-hmm. and maybe you could talk about that. But surely any parent in a divorce wants their child to be prioritized and what their needs and wants are.
Yeah. So children, we don't have to guess about what children need. And we have much more than just anecdotes, even though it is important to have the anecdotes. We do need to tell the stories of children who have experienced split homes, two different lives, the instability that goes along with that. But we don't have to guess at the issues with divorce. We have been studying it for decades. And what we see is there are physical harms that go along, genuine impacts to children's physical health when their parents divorce. There are emotional harms, there are academic harms, and there are long-term relational harms for kids. So just for example, even if you have a good divorce, even if you think, oh, if I'm happy, my kids will be happy. There was a study done in 2017 that studied the telomeres, that is the end caps of a child's chromosomes, that are in every cell of a child's body. And what they saw is that when children lose a parent, lose a father to death, incarceration, or divorce, it shortens the child's telomeres. It literally impacts every cell of their body. What do telomeres do? Well, they're responsible for health and longevity. And so what we see is, not surprisingly, children whose parents divorce, even if it's a low conflict divorce, even if the parents remain friends, even if they end up going into other household arrangements or marriages that seem to be tranquil, we still see that children suffer physically from that. We see that children of divorce have higher rates of long-term chronic illnesses. They have increased problems with their skin, their gut, their urinary organs. And so we have a direct correlation between diminished physical health for children and divorce. So even if you think, well, I'm going to handle this emotionally well, your child's body is going to receive it as a blow, and it really is going to implicate, at least put them at increased risk for all kinds of long-term medical issues.
Is there statistics around it affecting girls and boys differently?
So what we see is that father loss impacts girls and boys differently. So I talk about father loss because that's typically what takes place. If there is going to be a disconnection or a disassociation with one parent, it is typically the non-residential parent. Typically, mothers are awarded primary custody or sole custody in some cases. And children will lose contact with their non-residential parent, usually the father, after 2 years. Not all of them. 40% of children will lose total contact with their father 40% after 2 years. And so what happens, what's the impact of father loss, whether it's through divorce or maybe the parents just never married, maybe it's a single mother situation. So what we see in those situations of fatherlessness is an almost predictable patterns in boys and girls. Girls tend to experiment earlier with sexual relationships. In fact, we see, again, a measurable difference in the girl's body. On average, girls who are raised apart from their biological father will experience their first period 1 year earlier than girls who are raised in the home of their biological dad. Yeah. There's several theories about why that is, but something about having no father in the home or foreign pheromones of mother's boyfriend or a stepfather that initiates an early reproductive cycle in the girl. Couple that with the likely father hunger that she is experiencing, because all little girls long for, are made for, and desire to be cherished by a man. And if the man is not her father, who is offering that kind of protective guidance, she will find a man to love her. It just might be for 5 minutes on a Friday night. That is why 63% of girls in the United States who have teen pregnancies come from fatherless homes, right? Not only because they're reproductively ready, but they're vulnerable to the wrong kind of male attention. Boys who don't grow up with a father. Brad Wilcox just unveiled this astounding finding in his book, Get Married. He found that if a boy grows up without a father, he is more likely to go to prison than graduate from college. That is the impact of a fatherless home on a boy. Criminality is the more predictable result for boys. Why is that? Because fathers are distinctly wired to regulate a child's aggression, specifically a boy's aggression. And if they do not have a father in the home wrestling with them when they are age 4, arm wrestling with them when they're age 6, building and chopping and climbing trees, if they don't have a father that is channeling that aggressive, that competitiveness, sometimes the first time they run into that kind of physical boundary is with the police. And unfortunately, that's not the right place to test out your aggressiveness. They will find somebody like the girls, they will find a man to love them and shape them and guide them. And a lot of times it's a gang leader, somebody that is going to use them to advance their own aims. So fatherlessness is really at the heart of most of the social ills that we're facing in America, certainly in the UK too. I know that right now you have, I think 50% of the children in the UK will reach their 14th birthday in a fractured home. Right. So you guys have a pretty alarming rate of family breakdown taking place, and that does not bode well for your young sons and your young daughters.
And what about homosexual couples that end up going on to have children? Obviously, if you wouldn't mind expanding on your own experience with your parents getting divorced.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we do a lot of critiquing of modern families that them before us. Modern family is just code for child loss. The child has to lose something to be in that family, and that is going to harm the child. And you can.
Katy, but how have they lost something when they may not know? I understand the statistics you're bringing in, but these children are born without this person. Yes. So how have they lost something that they never even knew that they had? Yeah,
because they have it, right? Every child. No matter how modern we want to talk about family, no matter what kinds of modern technologies where we can assemble children in petri dishes, no matter how we modernize our parenthood laws or modernize our definition of infertility so that the state can subsidize motherless and fatherless children, children refuse to modernize. They refuse to be able to be created without the influence and the participation of one man and one woman. Children still require a man and a woman for their life to begin. And then statistically, it still is very, very clear from all of the data that one man and one woman are statistically the most likely to ensure that the child is safe and loved. There is something about that biological connection that advantages children in terms of investment of time, investment of resources, increased protectiveness, increased connectedness, increased belonging. And we know this because we have studied unrelated adults in the home. And we see that whenever there's an unrelated adult in the home, rates of abuse and neglect skyrocket. And so there's no question, if you're actually looking at the data, that you are disadvantaged when you are separated from your mother and father. So now let's talk about same-sex parenting. What is same-sex parenting from the child's perspective? It is always the loss of one biological parent, which is going to increase the likelihood that children are going to struggle with identity issues because only those two adults, a child's mother and father, grant them something that they crave, which is their biological identity. You know, children have a very hard time answering the question, who am I? If they cannot answer the question, whose am I? We know this because adoptees very often go on to look for and search for their birth mother. 94% of adoptees want to know which parent they resemble the most. The vast majority want to know why they were given up for adoption. Now we have surveys on sperm and egg donor conceived adults who feel the same way. At minimum, they want accurate medical records, but a lot of the times they want to know, do I look like you? Do you like to play the piano like me? Are you also an engineer and are you mechanically minded? These are not questions that their own social parents or even adoptive parents are able to answer for them, and they deeply matter to kids. And then same-sex parented homes are always going to be missing either the maternal or paternal love that maximizes child development. Fathers advantage children in ways that mothers don't. And just to circle back to my story, as you alluded, I'm saying this not because I'm saying lesbians can be bad, that they're bad mothers, or gay people are bad fathers. Absolutely not. My mother's been in a relationship with her partner since, for 40 years. So I spent most of my adolescence splitting time between the home of my father and the home of my mother and her partner. My mother was a better mother than your mother. My mother might be a better mother than I am. She's a fantastic mother. Her sexual attractions do not determine whether or not she is a good mother, but her biology does. And neither she nor her partner could ever be a father to me. And that's the problem. The problem is that when there's two men raising a child, that child is always missing a mother, and neither of those men will be able to function as a mother. When there's two women raising a child, the child is always missing a father. Neither of them, no matter how butch or short hair or masculine they present themselves to be, will ever meet that child's need for a father.
I remember when I've watched an interview with you before, and this is whoever is the other parent is obviously in some regards a step parent.
That's right.
And one of the interviews I watched of you before was talking about step parents. And for any of our viewers that don't understand this, I wonder if you could talk about the Cinderella effect and the dangers of it.
If you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you'll get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
Yeah, Wilson and Daly did extensive research. They were two Canadian sociologists who studied, between the years of 1976 and 1991, rates of deadly child abuse in Canada. And what they found is stepfathers were 140 times, not 140%, 140 times more likely to be responsible for the death of a child in their home than the child's own genetic father. So we have all of these perceptions that fathers are dangerous and, there's abuse within biological homes. There can be, but there's no improvement with any other form of family structure. And I often tell people, you can fact check me on this, because we have been so accustomed to say that biology doesn't matter, love makes a family, or kids don't need a mom and dad, they just need two parents, or if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy. Well, if all of those things are true, then children who are living with their mother and her cohabiting boyfriend would be doing great, because they've got two parents, the adults are happy, they even have a mother and a father figure. So I challenge people, Google the words mother's boyfriend right now. You can pause this interview right now and tell me, what do you see? What are all the returns when you Google mother's boyfriend? And you're going to see things like mother's boyfriend ties daughter to the bed and beats her to death. Mother's boyfriend cuts child up and stuffs them in a suitcase. Mother's boyfriend responsible for the beating death of an infant. Mother's boyfriend arraigned on charges because they suffocated the baby, or whatever it is. So mother's boyfriend, and I would just generalize that and say any unrelated man sharing living spaces with the child, especially left to care for the child alone, is statistically the most dangerous person in a child's life. And what we are doing in modern family is, in essence, normalizing, promoting, and incentivizing unrelated adults to be sharing living spaces with children.
And there's even Reddit groups where these step parents go on and say, I hate my stepchildren. What do I do about them? They're awful.
Yeah.
And
Yes, it's hard to raise children, and it's hard to have patience with your own child. But biology does allow a level of protection and connectivity that simply intending to parent or simply being in a romantic relationship with the child's biological parent, that it just doesn't provide. And I'm not saying that there aren't wonderful, heroic step-parents out there, because there are. But many of them have to overcome significant barriers to be that wonderful step-parent. It is not biologically wired in either the child or the adult to bond completely with a biological stranger. You are, in essence, working against many of the systems established, whether it's, through an evolutionary explanation or a religious perspective, that we really do have these kinship bonds that aid in connection, protection, and attachment. So it's not impossible to form those bonds with an unrelated child, but because there's additional barriers, that's the exact reason why adoptive parents like me, and probably like a lot of your listeners, have to go through extensive screening and background checks. Because social workers are not idiots. And they know that it takes more than saying, I want a baby, I intend to parent this baby, to actually treat that baby as if they had been born to you.
I want to go on to adoption now. You have adopted, two?
Just one.
You've adopted
Yeah.
just one child. And it's something that we've been talking about a lot since the grooming gang scandal.
Yeah.
I have to say, I haven't seen it come up much at ARC, despite this is a very pro-natalist organisation. There's been a lot of discussions about demographic collapse, how we can have more children, but I haven't seen many people talking about how we can sort the care system and how we can potentially take the children that are already born and put them in happy homes. So tell me about a bit of your experience, both adopting in your personal experience, but also you worked for a lot of adoption agencies.
Yeah, I worked at the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. I was responsible for agency compliance with international, federal, and state level laws. And so from that experience, I learned that adoption is not about adults. It's not about giving adults what they want. It's not a way for adults to get kids. Adoption, if it is properly understood, is an act of justice on behalf of the child. It is a just society's response to children who have experienced some of the most primal, enduring losses that any child can experience. When adoption is done well, it is always about the best interest of the child. If adoption is successful, every child that needs a loving home will find the right parents. But not every adult who wants a child is going to get one. You will screen out certain adults. So that is what adoption should be in the ideal. Unfortunately, adoption, and then I would say tipping into and spilling into the reproductive technology world, has become much more of a marketplace, something that is not centered around the well-being or the rights of the child, but really functions as a marketplace around the desires of adults. And so we are seeing, unfortunately, children being commodified in that space of reproductive technologies in a way that actually violates the best interest, the standards that have been established in adoption at the international, federal, and in the United States at the state level as well.
But why would they, you know, if you did want to have a child, why would you go and adopt when it's so impossible for you? And have you come up with any resistance being here, for example? Because there's a lot of people that are saying, we need to sort out the population, we need to have more children. So actually, let's just stop being so moral about how it's done and surrogacy and IVF. Let's just start having babies.
Yeah, it cannot be raise the population at any cost. The solution to the population problem cannot be commodification and dehumanization of the very children that we say that we are welcoming into society. In fact, I would say a child-centric understanding is probably the way forward, because if you understand that sex makes babies, and that those babies have a right to the two people who created them through sex, those children have a right to life. Honestly, if you solved your abortion problem, you would solve a lot of your demographic problem. That's a child-centric view, right? That adoption,
Sorry.
Yes. So I think that I heard it said that you had, James Orr was just telling me, your abortion rates, what are they, like?
500,000.
Yes, about 550,000 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's part of your demographic problem right now. A child-centric understanding says children have a fundamental right to life. You cannot force them out of existence just because they are unwanted. So then a child-centric understanding of reproductive technology says children have a right to life and they have a right to their mother and father. You cannot force them into existence if they are very wanted, especially if it means that many children will lose their right to life in the process, or maybe they will lose their mother or father in the process. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are in the UK, but in the United States, we lose about 1 million lives to abortion every year. It's a safe bet that 4 million are lost to IVF every year. And so we have this idea that reproductive technologies, IVF, surrogacy, it's all about making babies. It's not. When we look at what it is in practice, IVF and surrogacy is about on-demand designer babies shipped worldwide, usually upon the pile of dozens of dead babies who are being donated to research, left in a freezer, or discarded as medical waste. So these are not, neither of these worlds, the baby taking industry or the baby making industry, are child-centric. We need to get back to the place where we respect that children should be welcomed into the world, that anytime you are consenting to sex, you're consenting to parenthood, and then you protect that fundamental little life, whether it's unwanted or very wanted.
And obviously this is part of Mary Harrington's argument that part of the problem with having the pill is that you can have this carefree sex. But I suppose I hear you about the 500,000 abortions a year, and that really shocked me when I heard that statistic. Although anyone that I know that's had an abortion, it's been because they wouldn't give this child a child-centric life. So what do you do about that?
Yeah, the answer to any question of what do you do in any marriage or family question is always the same. Either the adults are going to sacrifice, or the child is going to sacrifice. Let's look at some of those situations. There's an unplanned pregnancy. The woman maybe wants the baby. Maybe the guy doesn't want the baby. Okay, what is the solution? The solution is that mother and father both sacrifice to protect the child's right to life and right to their mother and father. Because what is the alternative? The child sacrifices their life, or they sacrifice their right to their mother and father, and that's an injustice. So the solution in an unplanned pregnancy is the adult's sacrifice to protect the child. What about in a struggling marriage? Okay, well, the answer there is someone is going to sacrifice. It will either be the adults who figure out the communication issues, the financial challenges, or the pornography addiction, work it out, and sacrifice so the child can continue to live in both of their, with both of their parents in the same home with all of the attending physical, mental, emotional, academic, and relational benefits, or the children will sacrifice. Somebody's going to do the hard thing there. It will be the adults or the child. What about in a situation of somebody who identifies as gay or lesbian? Somebody is going to, and maybe they would be a wonderful father or mother.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to sacrifice. Either the child will sacrifice their right to their mother or father so the adult can form a family around their romantic attractions, or the gay or lesbian adult will sacrifice their attractions and build a family in a way where the child is raised by both their married mother and father, loving each other and loving them. So in all of these marriage and family questions, it's not a matter of, oh, it's easy, no one's doing the hard thing. It's usually a matter of the adults are going to take the easy path and the child will have to do the hard thing. And that's a society characterized by injustice.
Back to adoption, I wanted to ask you partly about your own personal story because you adopted a Chinese boy.
Yes.
Aged, how old is he?
He's 15 now.
He's 15 now.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask what the experience is of having your own biological children and then having an adopted child, and whether has there ever been a moment where you thought it might be harder for the adoptive child to experience that you also have your own biological children at the same time?
Yeah, I of course, before I adopted, I had been in the adoption world. I did not have any rose-colored glasses that this was going to fix all the problems. In fact, especially because he was older and because he has a special need, because he was in an institution for the first 2 years of his life, we were prepared for the possibility that this could be very challenging, and it was. It was challenging for him because he was starved in the first 2 years of his life in every way that a human can be starved, in terms of nutrition, in terms of connection, in terms of guidance, in terms of attachment, in terms of nurturing. So he came to us as a 2-year-old with some deficits that, to be quite honest, may never fully heal. And it was very challenging for him to then come into a home where there was obviously, I pray, lavish love, but also boundaries. And, as Erica Komisar talks about, those birth to 3, if you miss that window, you very often cannot get it back. And we miss that window. So what you see is children that do not have that kind of proper attachment with their mother struggle with things like trust, emotional regulation. It's interesting, we're here. I brought both of my sons, my 17 and 15-year-old, to the conference. And even now, he's been with us for 13 years and I have never abandoned him. But I said, oh, hey, can you go grab this in the room before we head down? And he goes, okay, but don't leave me. He still will say, he still has this panic, like, oh my gosh, don't leave. My other 3 children never had those kinds of panics. They'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go grab this. My mom's not going to leave. She's still going to be right outside the hotel door waiting for me. So there really is this breaking, honestly, of what it means to be human in those very, very early years, that it's sometimes not, I'm not saying it can never happen, but if you miss that window, it's not like you can just get it back when they're 9 or 19 or 29. Very often they may have to override that internal panic all their life because they lost it. They lost it when they should have had it the most.
It's very interesting. My mum was adopted at 8 weeks and we almost never talk about it. It's not something that she ever has shown any example of it affecting her, but she did say when we were on walks before, she hates being at the back. She's a very fast walker, and she did mention once, quite flippantly, I think it's something to do with like not being left behind. It was really profound when she said that, because it's just so strange how these things can affect you in such a small but significant way. I want to ask you about the age of adoption. Thinking about also my mum, she was adopted at 8 weeks, and some of the research we've been doing at the Spectator is whether, and perhaps this is quite controversial, the obsession with keeping a child with their biological parents comes eventually at the expense of them, because they are raised in a very vulnerable household, and care workers want to do everything they can to keep them with the child. But then you lose these essential 3 years in which a child can grow up and be in a happy, stable home. And should there be policies that are a bit stricter and perhaps end up taking a child away from a mother, away from a father earlier to save them? And then how do you square that with a child should always be with its biological mother and father?
There's two errors that you can fall into here. One is giving too much credence to what the biological parents want, and the other is giving too much credence to what the adoptive parents want. So the two errors are going to be adult-centric, adult-focused. Both of these cases, and in all of these situations, it has to elevate the primary interest of the child. Sometimes it is in the best interest of the child to be immediately and permanently removed from a biological parent, and then adopted as soon as possible, or at least after that right kind of like, have we actually examined the situation and understand that that should not be a home that the child should return to, and then place the child with adoptive parents rather than a revolving door of foster parents, for example, in the United States. The other error is saying, well, this is what the adults want, right? And we've actually had some arguments made in the States that, for example, LGBT couples or same-sex couples have a right to adopt, that this is their way to get kids, and they can't have kids any other way. And so we have a right to have an adopted child. And the answer is no.
It's homophobic if you say
it's homophobic
no.
if you don't. And the answer is no, you don't have a right to adopt a child. Because no adult has a right to a child that I didn't have a right to adopt my son. He had a right to be adopted. The system, the process, the evaluation is about him. It's not about me. So we have seen both of those errors in the United States, where unfortunately there's sort of a racial component in the United States where if, for example, there is a Black mother or a Hispanic family where there's abuse taking place, especially because mother's boyfriend is involved, and there isn't a Black home that you can place the child into, in some places they've thought, oh no, it will be bad for the child if they're raised by a white family or living in a white home, so the child has remained in the abusive home. So that is a very, unfortunately, an adult-centric mentality about that, rather than we need to make an immediate decision about this child's well-being and remove them from the home, regardless of how upset it makes this parent, and certainly placing children in the right home, regardless of how upset it makes some other intended parents. So it's just, these are very challenging situations, and unfortunately, sometimes they are subjective. How much is it going to harm the child if we remove them? How dangerous is this situation we're taking them away from? And that is why we need wonderful people in these positions that have a child-centric mindset about it. But when you're in these kinds of messy, adjudications, there is some subjectivity there. But always, whenever possible, you have to elevate the best interest of the child.
Couple more questions, Katy. So America's experienced a big change in politics.
Yeah.
You have Trump 2.0.
Yeah.
And the second most powerful man in the whole of the administration is Elon Musk.
You think so?
It feels that way. Do you not think so?
Well, I don't know. He hasn't been voted in, so I don't know. Does he have more power than any of the other people that have been appointed? I don't know.
Maybe it's just all rhetoric and talk.
Yeah,
and he's just got the loudest
voice. He certainly
voice.
has the biggest, the most, maybe even the largest persona. I'll totally give you that.
I mean, he definitely sets the tone on X, which has become so politicized, and
that is unequivocally true.
And he is, I think he's recently been accused of having his 13th child.
I think it's been confirmed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think Donald Trump has been accused of having his own history with having several children from different women.
Also confirmed.
And I wanted to ask you about how you feel about having these leaders and how much there should be setting the example, of course, but also when you are around Americans and a lot of people, I think it would be fair to say, are feeling quite hopeful about this administration. I've heard a lot of pro-Trump, pro-Elon Musk narrative. And then actually you look at their backgrounds and you look at their family homes, based off what you're saying, they're not child-centric
Right.
individuals.
That's right. They're not. So they cannot be elevated as moral examples.
No.
And they are not, certainly not Elon Musk. He doesn't claim to be, but I don't even think Trump does. They're not convictional conservatives. They are pragmatists. And Trump likes to win, and he understands what's popular, and he knows how to get things done. And thank goodness he seems to be more closely aligned with things like economic, historical, and biological reality than the previous administration. And that has redounded to, I think, some pretty fantastic executive orders and appointments in his cabinet. Wonderful. When it comes to their own personal lives, I'm like, follow J.D. Vance, not Musk, not Trump.
Lastly, actually very similar to the J.D. Vance thing, because I think this brings in religion. And I read on your Substack that your daughter got married recently.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you quoted, and I can't remember it exactly, so I'll paraphrase, but I just wish that everyone saw when you have this line about the importance of marriage, I wish people took these honours seriously, took these oaths seriously.
Yeah.
And I wondered how much your book and your other books are possible and feasible in a society where actually religion is in decline.
So I don't know if religion is in decline. You just had a poll. I think it was it the Times researchers that just did a poll like a week or two ago that said that your next generation of Gen Zers were half as likely to identify as atheists as their parents. And religion is making a comeback. In the United States, Bible sales are up 22%. Gen Z, the next generation, is taking a hard turn to the right politically, but also morally. Again, just last week there was a poll taken in the UK of 1,000 Zoomers that showed that they were rejecting hookups, anonymous hookups, much more than their millennial counterparts. They were watching less porn and they valued marriage more.
Not potentially from religion, that's actually
not potential. That's just a rightward trend.
Yeah,
that's a rightward trend. And so I don't necessarily know if religion is on the decline. It certainly is up with the boomers, right? And then Gen Z, my generation, Gen X, somewhat. But I think religion is making a comeback. And that is because I think all of the woke ideology has proven itself to be utterly vacuous and led to meaninglessness and despair. And young people are turning towards something more substantive, and they're finding that in religion. We do see that, what I am observing in my world is that the religious are more eager to get married sooner and more likely to have more children. It certainly looks to me like economics is not going to get you out of the birth dearth. It has to be a better story about man, woman, marriage, children, a better story about, why are we here? What are we doing? And the importance of family that goes along with that. And religion does provide that better story.
And last question, I promise. What advice do you think you have for young boys and girls who might want to look for a happy marriage that they can stay in, not go through a divorce, and be child-centric? What do you think is the route to that sort of thing?
Well, everybody says that the divorce rate is 50%, but that is generally because a lot of people get married and divorced over and over and over again, so they skew the data for everybody else. If you are, if you don't shack up and you don't sleep around before you're married, if you have a thorough, deliberate dating process, if you then get married before you have children, and if you attend weekly religious services together, your divorce rate is below 10%. So you actually have a lot of control over whether or not your marriage lasts and whether or not your marriage is a happy one. Studies consistently show that highly religious conservative women have the best, most satisfying sex. And so this idea that you're going to be locked up, that religion is some kind of jail for women, it's just not true. Religious men, highly religious men that are Christians and attend weekly services, report that their wives are the most happy. They help the most with housework. Married men in general tend to earn more degrees and make more money, work more overtime. I mean, there's something about marriage that matures a man in a way that playing video games in the basement simply never will. And so I think that we need to tell children the truth about the goodness of marriage in terms of their personal lives, their work lives. And then obviously we need to display and talk about how wonderful children are. One of the reasons why I bring my kids with me when I travel travel, is because they're awesome. And it's great for people to see that. It's great for people to observe that these kids are not draining me, limiting me, shackling me. It's actually the greatest delight of my life. So we need more examples of that. Older couples that are, not older couples, anybody who's married with children, not boasting about their lives, but revealing their life to the next generation who wonders if it's even possible.
Katy Faust, everyone, go and read her book. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.